Okay, hi everyone. I'm coming to you from the beach today. So, if you can see in the background, I first read Mira Gonzalez's "I Will Never Be Beautiful Enough to Make Us Beautiful Together" at the beach. I thought I would do the lecture at the beach, and I'm just going to start today's lecture by just reading one of the poems from the work, one of the poems that I like. It's called "Untitled 2." Let's read it. I'm sitting on the hood of your car in front of an elementary school in the rain. I'm using barely perceptible hand gestures to describe the feeling I get at night in the last 5 minutes before falling asleep, of wanting our molecules to occupy the same space. You are telling the police that I'm your girlfriend. You are putting your cigarette out on the bottom of my shoe. I am not your girlfriend. Time passes. You say, "Why are you doing this?" I tell you that I don't understand the question. You say, "Please, don't do this." The left side of your face is momentarily illuminated by the headlights of a passing car. So, I'm trying to keep the beach in frame here, but it's not really working. I guess the lighting. Okay, so I just want to just do a very quick kind of close reading of this poem. Um, a lot of the language in this book is kind of you can kind of quickly. I think you can really quickly read this book. It's very kind of digestible. It's not like Darwin's Taipei, where you have to really kind of parse what exactly is going on in the sentences. The sentences are, I think, as one of the student presenters mentioned this week, they are kind of very tweet-like. But there are some things that you can kind of gloss over when you're reading it very quickly. Even the first two opening sentences of this poem, "I am sitting on the hood of your car in front of an elementary school in the rain." So it seems kind of a very bizarre activity right away. So they're not sitting in the car, they're sitting on the hood of the car. They're not sitting in front of a viewpoint or anything like that, but they're sitting in front of an elementary school. And they're sitting outside in the rain. So, I mean, you can kind of quickly read those sentences, but when you just slow down a little bit, it does seem a little bit bizarre. There's kind of activity there. And then it gets into kind of a lot of what this text is about, which is the problems with kind of communicating feeling, especially over the internet, but also in person. So she writes, "I am using barely perceptible hand gestures to describe the feeling I get at night in the last 5 minutes before falling asleep, of wanting our molecules to occupy the same space." So this these progression of lines, it slowly gets even kind of more and more difficult, the act of communication that she's attempting. So first of all, she's not using words. She's using this kind of mode of communication that's kind of very micro, very minimal, barely perceptible hand gestures, whatever that means. And then the feeling I get and what she's trying to communicate is the feeling I get at night in the last 5 minutes before falling asleep, of wanting our molecules to occupy the same space. So, uh, yeah, I mean, it's kind of an impossible desire to have molecules occupy the same space. So she's trying to communicate something impossible, and the way that she's communicating that is also marked a little bit by impossibility, just by kind of the limits of her communicative ability. She's not resorting to words, but she's choosing hand gestures, and barely perceptible ones. So then it gets into kind of the police interaction, which is kind of a very kind of jarring movement in the poem. So you're telling the police that I'm your girlfriend. How does that kind of follow up from where did the police kind of come into this? Is kind of an open question. But it kind of speaks to kind of a mood of kind of interrogation, I guess. That there's these kind of intruders into kind of the communication that they're attempting. They've been interrupted by the police, and now they're kind of communicating with the police. And the police are kind of demanding, it seems like, labels, or at least the man in this encounter is putting a label on the speaker of being his girlfriend, even though that is not true. So again, a kind of a communication kind of failure. Then there's the line "Time passes." I really liked Alicia's video presentation, her kind of image of reading this text. I think she described it as being in like a subway and watching all the people kind of pass by, and just that feeling of all these kind of very kind of repetitious movement of the subway just coming and going, but also kind of making observations along the way. So that kind of, even though it's kind of this repetition, monotony of the kind of the subway system, there's still kind of interesting observations to be made. And the kind of the end effect of having read this book, I really like Alicia's description of it, of having experienced the passage of time. And that is the experience of time passing, especially during, I think, this lockdown that we've been is still kind of ongoing during the virus. I saw this meme about kind of how quickly March passed by, and then April felt like 2 years or something like that, just because of people's change in behavior. So the marking of time, I think that is a kind of a good outcome of reading this book, of having observed time passing. I just want to skip, for the sake of time, to the last two lines of the poem. Left side of your face is momentarily illuminated by the headlights of a passing car. So again, this is kind of an image that I really like, and I had to kind of break down why I liked it so much. And part of it's just like kind of the limited knowledge we get of the male character in this poem. And it kind of goes to a lot of the kind of the texts that we've been reading in this course, that are kind of first person perspective, which this kind of book of poetry is kind of very first person perspective a lot of the time. And the limited perspectives we get of other people in a lot of these texts. So here we just get a really kind of nice image of how limited our perspective of this other person in this encounter is. So the left side of your face. So kind of this real kind of, fragmented part of this person's body. So not just their face, but the left side of their face. So just half of them. Momentarily illuminated. So we're not getting kind of a full disclosure of this person, but we're getting a momentary illumination of this person. And what is doing the momentary illuminating? The headlights of a passing car. So again, it's not like kind of a spotlight or anything, but it's something that it's a kind of a very passing illumination. So just kind of a tiny bit of illumination to this person, even though it's not really illuminating, but it kind of speaks, I think, in this image to the limitations of our knowledge of other people, that they are these like half knowledges and kind of momentary knowledges of other people, even people that we're kind of close to, as the speaker kind of seems to be close to this male character, even though she's not his girlfriend. So what I kind of wanted to talk about in this lecture more generally is kind of a millennial melancholia. So I think we're all kind of millennials in this course, though I don't want to make any suppositions. I think Amory, I don't know if Amory is a millennial, but we can make him an honorary millennial for this course. So I think the millennial generation is a kind of an interesting generation, because the objects of desire of maybe the boomer generation aren't as kind of easily imaginable for us. So we don't have kind of, or at least from millennials that I talk to, and myself as well, we don't have kind of like the definite objects of desire of the boomer generation. So things like retirement, a house, a stable career, a lot of that. I mean, probably a lot of us do kind of still desire those things, thinking about a retirement, thinking about having a family, thinking about owning a house perhaps, though in Vancouver that seems, it seems impossible in Vancouver, maybe somewhere else. Retirement perhaps is something to think about. Having a family, just from millennials that I talk to, especially women, the time frame of having a family is kind of very difficult to work out, just because I guess I don't know what it is, but a lot of the women that I know entering their kind of 30s or in their 30s are still looking for kind of a stable relationship, and are not kind of sure about having kids, but at least want to kind of keep the option of having kids open. But there definitely isn't that kind of same desire, I think, for these kind of definite objects of desire as perhaps the boomer generation. Not to dunk on them, but at least they kind of had, at least they could imagine owning a house in Vancouver or something like that. So again, to kind of come back to Freud, so Freud kind of defines melancholia as a position where it's different from mourning. Mourning is where you lose kind of a definite object in your life. Maybe you lose a family member, or it can be something more minor. Maybe you lose like your laptop, or your car gets totaled or something like that. You have this kind of object that you have to mourn its loss for. But then you can also kind of desire can emerge out of that. So the desire perhaps to buy a new laptop, or to get a new car. Melancholia is kind of an objectless sense of mourning, where you have all the same sensations of mourning, but you're not exactly sure what you've lost. So there not being kind of a definite object that you've lost, your sense of mourning kind of turns in upon yourself, at least in Freud's reading of the experience of melancholia. So just kind of quoting from Freud, he writes that the distinguishing mental features of melancholia are a profoundly painful sense of dejection, a cessation of interest in the outside world, loss of capacity to love, inhibition of all activity, a lowering of the self-regarding feelings to a degree that finds utterance in self-reproaches and self-revilings. So the kind of there not being kind of a definite object in the world that you're kind of mourning for, your kind of attention turns in upon yourself. So you start to self-evaluate yourself quite a bit. So in the Freudian kind of language, the ego turns in upon itself, and kind of enters into a process of kind of auto-analysis or self-analysis, where you're kind of always kind of evaluating yourself, analyzing your emotions, and yeah, I think that is definitely going on in Mira Gonzalez's book. And the way that I kind of mark that going on in the book is through we kind of talked about the pronouns in you, the pronoun you. So the pronoun you actually occurs in Gonzalez's book quite a bit as well. There's a lot of poems that have the pronoun you as the kind of the main kind of pronoun in the poem. But there's also kind of a lot of poems that have the pronoun I. So a lot of the book is kind of composed of these I and these you poems, which is kind of, to me, it kind of speaks of this kind of, when the you is kind of being used, it is referring to the I, not to be circular, and the I is kind of using that you to refer to the speaker of the poems. So it's kind of this loop between the I and the you, which I think is kind of representative perhaps of the dialogue that we have with ourselves quite a bit. So something as simple as, I'm going to go to the store today and buy these groceries so I can cook dinner tonight, or I'm going to finish my essay so I can meet the deadline. And then perhaps when that doesn't happen, maybe our inner discourse turns toward a you. So you always don't meet deadlines. Why don't you? Sorry, maybe this is getting too close or personal, but why can't you meet deadlines? I mean, we have these kind of voices in our head that sometimes they speak with the I voice, and sometimes they speak with the you voice. So I mean, in Freud, that would be kind of defined as the ego is the I. I'm going to do this. And then the superego, which is kind of cultural expectations on the individual, kind of speaks in that you voice. So you have to work harder, or something like that. Or you should be out on a Friday night enjoying yourself. And then, yeah, so I just want to read a poem from the book that kind of speaks to this kind of self-evaluation. So the poem Ryan Gosling, which I don't know why it's titled Ryan Gosling. So it goes, I am becoming increasingly hostile and unsympathetic. Social interaction makes me feel tired and irritated. I have alienated myself. Sorry, dramatic interval. I don't have meaningful relationships. I don't have romantic relationships. I read a lot of depressing books. I like being alone. I am a bland person. I am an afterthought. I am a bag of unsalted pretzels. I don't know. I am constantly reaching towards some nebulous goal. I am not a mean person. I am not a bad person. I am only okay. So the nebulous goal that this speaker of the poem seems to be reaching for is some kind of stable understanding of herself, and that kind of stabilization doesn't ever really occur. So the poem concludes with the line, I am only okay, which isn't really kind of a grand conclusion to reach about your kind of self-identity. I am only okay. It seems to be kind of avoiding the question that the poem is kind of setting out for itself. So that kind of nebulous goal of kind of this kind of stable self-identity, it's kind of thwarted by the poem itself. That kind of repetition of the I am, it never kind of reaches any satisfactory conclusion. Okay, so another kind of, I think, aspect of kind of millennial melancholia is, sorry, now there's a helicopter or some kind of plane passing above me, is kind of this urge for kind of self-improvement, to always kind of be bettering ourselves. And of course, I think that's important. I think I'm a really strong believer in kind of individual kind of striving for some goal, of kind of trying to be a better person every day. But the way that kind of gets, if you can hear me, gets mobilized in a lot of kind of discourse today is toward these kind of like practices like exercise or fitness, or kind of the lifelong learning that SFU kind of advocates. And while you can sort of kind of agree with a lot of that, exercise does make you feel better, and that that you should be kind of improving yourself every day in some way, and not kind of indulging in a lot of the activities perhaps that the speaker of the poem, speaker of these poems kind of engages in, like drugs, or kind of just lying paralyzed in bed, or waking up not at 5 a.m. and going for a 10-kilometer run like the character in The Modern Intimate, and then kind of having baked oatmeal, and kind of being a total Eric of like kind of this kind of robot of kind of self-improvement, that the kind of the human spirit kind of can still have kind of a response to that. I mean, these are still kind of alien discourses, like the discourse of self-improvement. You couldn't really thrust that upon a person in like the Middle Ages or something. They would be like, what are you talking about? Why do I have to improve? Why do I have to better myself every day? So there can still be kind of a reaction to this kind of pressure of always kind of making ourselves better in some way. And a lot of, I think, that reaction is kind of logged in these poems, where there's kind of like, if you guys know the short story Bartleby the Scrivener by Melville, that I prefer not to, line by Bartleby, that he just prefers not to. He doesn't want to kind of go along with this kind of flow of kind of everyday life under kind of contemporary modernist, capitalist, neoliberal conditions, patriarchal, whatever you want to call it. That there is something kind of wrong at the kind of more social level of the way that in which life is structured, that the individual can have some kind of protest toward. So yeah, one of the lines from the poem that kind of speaks to this. In the poem, the main purpose of the heart is to make heart sounds. We think that we only have free will when we are alone, and that we don't want to become better people. So yeah, kind of this response or reaction against the kind of conformity of always becoming better people, whatever that means. If I'm to trust Instagram, that just means having absolutely insane bodies. That's kind of self-improvement today, but yeah, I still kind of believe that there is something true about those kind of discourses, but they can kind of feel kind of overbearing at times as well. So yeah, I think there are kind of larger kind of social issues that the speaker of the poem is kind of these poems is kind of reacting to or responding to, and the way that these kind of social issues get represented in the poems is in the image of weather, I think. So weather comes up a few times in the poems. I'll just read a couple lines. Saying words that have positive connotations will cause catastrophic weather patterns. It hurts us both when I held you from behind, because I couldn't change the weather with my arms. So the weather in these poems seems to be this kind of uncontrollable kind of force that that the speaker of the poem can't really influence in any way, whether it's by trying to hold this other person, or kind of the words that she uses, even if they have kind of positive connotations, they will cause catastrophic weather patterns. So the weather kind of represents this kind of aspect of life that the speaker of the poems doesn't have any kind of control over, and she's not really sure how to respond to as well. So just kind of, again, kind of going on the Millennial Melancholia theme here. This is from a thesis that was recently published by one of the MA students in SFU's humanities program, a person that I know, Alexis Wolf. So she's just writing about millennials here. A fear of growing up that haunts a society that cannot individuate. The tendency to repeat in style, in speech, in activity and behavior, the patterns of childhood might be one way we can visualize cultural responses to deterritorialization, which just means basically that kind of our common kind of objects of desire, perhaps from the past, like having a family, having a house, kind of having a stable career, are kind of just being completely dissolved in front of our faces. So the apocalyptic mood that besets millennials and Generation Z, partly induced by economic cynicism, the foreclosure of the future, inevitable downward mobility, and dramatic pause as I change paper here, partly by cultural repetition, the formulaic and now nostalgic products of the culture industry, captures their psyches in a state of perpetual adolescence. So what the person's kind of talking to is kind of, in that last line especially, is kind of what I see as kind of like the infantilizing of our generation. And I've been kind of, I think I've been dunking on too many people in this course, at least some of the stuff, but like the Star Wars stuff, I will never, maybe someone can convince me, although I guess I'm not completely innocent because I love like Harry Potter still, even though J.K. Rowling is now canceled, but the Star Wars stuff, it just kind of seems to be like this kind of thing that people return to kind of for re-experiencing their childhood. I'm sorry, but I mean, I haven't seen any of the Harry Potter sequels. I don't know if I would see them, but if maybe someone can convince me why Star Wars is good, I'd be open to that. But there are kind of a lot of kind of moments in these poems that kind of speak to the speaker being kind of caught this kind of extended contemplation on childhood, or at least adolescence. There's a lot of kind of the book that is, sorry, I'm very dark now because it's getting dark. Maybe I'll try to, so there's a lot of the poem that speak to kind of memories from childhood. So visiting her childhood home, visiting her childhood kind of neighborhood. sitting in front of that elementary school in the first poem that I read. There's the phrase specific nostalgic emotion. So nostalgia is kind of a major kind of theme of the poems as well. So this kind of continual return to kind of childhood. And this is like something that I think I do as well. So I do kind of still have these kind of recurring, to keep in the kind of the Freudian vibe of this lecture, I still kind of have a lot of dreams where I'm back at my old elementary school, and the layout of the elementary school has completely changed, which caused me kind of great anxiety. That this kind of familiar object that I kind of knew like the back of my hand, the kind of the whole layout of the elementary school has been completely changed. And also kind of elementary school or even high school. I think we've actually kind of talked about this in the course. I think Dom kind of brought up this point, particularly about kind of the university, which maybe one day you guys will have nostalgia for. University kind of having a structure to it, but particularly elementary school, where I think one of the poems, the speaker kind of talks to the teacher, asking her, "What's wrong? Why are you crying?" There are these people that kind of care about us and care about why we're crying, and will ask us what's wrong, and actually seem to kind of genuinely care. Why does the speaker of the poem kind of keep returning to these moments from childhood? There is kind of some kind of loss there of care or of structure that these poems are speaking to. Okay, so just kind of, these are kind of more scattered notes at this point. I'm constantly kind of anxious that I've been taking like a photo the whole time, not taking a video, so hopefully this works. Hopefully it's recording my voice, God. So just kind of scattered comments or thoughts at this point. So one of the kind of the articles that I read about this book of poetry when it came out was talking about kind of the flat affect of these poems. So flat affect meaning there's kind of no kind of catharsis, no kind of amazing, strong emotions that completely overwhelm the speaker. She treats affect kind of like scientifically, like under a microscope. Or emotion. I think emotion is kind of the same word basically as affect. So she's always kind of examining emotions, or she's always at some distance of remove from emotion. Or the emotions of these poems kind of seem also to happen in between the spaces, between the lines of the poem. So that flat affect, I think it kind of speaks to one of the themes of this course in terms of the internet. So the internet is kind of very flat. Our computer screens are flat. Our phone screen that I'm recording this on, and which you guys are seeing me through, I'm not sitting next to you, but I'm kind of, you're seeing me as kind of this like two-dimensional representation of myself, and kind of getting increasingly dark. I'm sorry. Hopefully this isn't too creepy. I don't know how to get more lighting. Maybe if I turn a little bit. That's not great either. Okay, so just bear with me for the end here. When the poem is kind of doing this kind of flat affect, this kind of affect kind of flattened out for microscope examination, it does seem to really recall kind of affect or emotion on the internet. And one of the kind of the main kind of images of that is kind of like the live stream Facebook videos where all these kind of emojis flash across the screen as people kind of react to whatever is going on the Facebook live stream. But basically, even just like emojis are kind of this very kind of flat representation of emotion, whether it's a smiley face or a sad face, or kind of Robert from Cat Person, the dolphin emojis. I think I asked one of the students in the short essay, he was talking about, I forget, was talking about the emojis that Robert uses in his texts, and asked her to do kind of a close reading of the emojis. Like, what does the dolphin really mean? How does that tie into the whole story? But is it possible to do a close reading of emojis, or are they kind of just depthless? Is there nothing really to interpret there? Are they just too flat or flattened out? And also kind of that flat affect, it removes all these kind of, or at least I think, like, because I'm not sitting beside you or standing in front of a classroom talking to you, it removes kind of a lot of the communication of the body, that, especially when it's this dark, that I think it's very kind of important. Okay, so more kind of scattered thoughts. Parking. Parking is kind of a major image of these stories. Just reading some lines. This is one of my favorite lines from the poem. I'm trying to parallel park my car. I'm trying to make you love me. Another kind of quote from a poem. The edges of things seem abruptly hard to define. You park your car in the dark, become startled, and drive somewhere else. Another poem. This one is called It is 10 a.m. and I'm drinking coffee out of a jar. I think one of the students mentioned this. I think Alicia or Bonnie mentioned this in one of their presentations, this poem. I am parked across the street from a cemetery in a 2-hour parking spot. Again, a weird spot to park, at least to me. I will sit here for an hour, then pay the meter, and sit here for an additional hour. In my car, things seem okay. Outside, a drug deal is happening. So I did kind of think a little bit about what the parking means in this poem, and that last line, in the car things seem okay. So there's this kind of bubble around the person that kind of protects them, but also there's this kind of the image of a car as this kind of, especially in those lines about parallel parking. Parallel parking is hard, and you're controlling this kind of big unwieldy object that you're trying to position in between two other kind of big unwieldy objects, and you have to have kind of like the sense of the boundaries of your car. So yeah, I think there is kind of a very strong connection between that car and the difficulty of it as this kind of unwieldy object, and also the speaker's kind of body, not really knowing how to kind of use it properly, or where in that last poem that I read, or sorry, one of the middle quotes, the edges of things seem abruptly hard to define. So perhaps the edges of her own body sometimes, they kind of are difficult to outline. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'm at about 30 minutes now, so and it's getting really dark. So I think that's all I'm going to talk about today. I'll see you guys in the Zoom session tomorrow. So yeah, I'll just leave you guys with a shot of the beach.